Hello, and welcome to episode 5 of Malcolm's show, Stream of Consciousness. Today I'm going to talk about a few things. First thing I call the professional cleaner's paradox. Now, the professional cleaner's paradox is something I think can be most easily summed up as if your job is to clean up the world, you kind of have a professional interest to keep the world dirty to an extent, because then there's always business. So what I want to connect that to today is an understanding for the mental health industry and something I call the medical industrial complex. So, the medical industrial complex, I feel, is fairly simple to understand. It's basically, if you understand what the military industrial complex is, in that there are businesses which have vested interest in keeping wars alive, keeping destruction going, famine, poverty, all that nasty business, because that's how they make their money. For example, your defense contractors, your BAE Systems, your Boeings, your General Dynamics, your Leidoses, Lockheed Martins, Northrop Grumman's, your Raytheons, these big businesses that have these very close ties with governments and have these very lucrative contracts, which gives them an interest in keeping warfare alive. So whilst I will maybe talk about that in a future episode, because I do think it's very interesting and I think it's actually a very significant part of what makes the world work, today we're talking a bit more about the medical industrial complex. On a similar note, to remind myself as well as to drop some seeds for the future, uh, something I call the media industrial complex, which I think are sort of the big three. So the military industrial complex, the media industrial complex, and today's topic, medical industrial complex. So the medical industrial complex, I think, is sort of perpetuated by a few big things. The first one of which is mental health professionals, which if we relay to the professional cleaner's paradox, is the idea that, let's say for instance, the only way you're going to sustain an income and thereby, put food in your fridge, clothes on your back, a roof over your head, as well as do the same for your family, is by solving mental health maladies, then if everybody is eventually healthy, theoretically, you're out of a job. Which to some extent might create the idea that if the world is perpetuated to be unhealthy, then mental health professionals remain in a job. Now, I'm not trying to insinuate that the entire mental health industry is trying to keep people mentally unhealthy to keep themselves alive. I'm bringing forth an idea, and I'm bringing forth an idea that I think is actually not unreasonable. I have had my own personal experience with mental health professionals. So, in the country I live, the UK, the National Health Service does its very best to help people. Unfortunately, it is overstretched, it's underfunded, and there's a million billion other problems going on with it, which are not the scope of today's episode, however, probably worth discussing at some point. So, something else that I think is really relevant with it is that not everybody can afford to go through private healthcare, thus the importance of noting something like the National Health Service. So, for instance, if you're going to go into private counselling, which I was very fortunate to be able to afford for a short time, something I noticed with it is not all the mental health professionals are there to make you feel better. Anybody who's ever experienced being conned or hustled or scammed or anything like that kind of understands that there are people who will just take advantage of you to take your money rather than actually be there to help you get better and help you understand what's causing the symptoms of your mental unhealth. So the experience I'm talking about is I think I saw the guy about 8 times, and it was before the eighth visit I clocked on that the stories he was telling and the imaginary son, which I believe was an imaginary son that he related to, had an incredibly similar life story to mine, down to his hobbies, down to his characteristics physically and all of that, and it was just it made me feel very uncomfortable. So, for instance, I was an avid World of Warcraft player, his son was an avid World of Warcraft player. Oh, I do all this in my spare time, such as climbing and walking. His son does all this in spare time, climbing and walking. And every little thing was just a little too precise for it to be coincidental. Now, personally, as a small aside, I think words like coincidence and random, from what I learn about my conversations with family friends who've worked in law enforcement, there's no such thing as coincidence or random. simply because, from my understanding of their perspective, is when you've been in those fields that long, you understand that the world doesn't really work as magically and mystically as you're led to believe as a child. My own personal perspective on that is the word random is a bit nonsense, and really it's just a word to describe a mathematical equation or expression we don't understand yet. So, for instance, what might seem quote unquote random to one person is actually very easily explainable and understandable by another person. You follow that scale up the ladder until eventually you find the most intelligent, capable person who can describe what was perceived as random as actually a very logical process of, well, this happened, so that happened, just as we have on the chessboard in front of us. Nothing going on here is random. The algorithm I'm playing against is specifically calculating all these moves for a reason. Sometimes it might sense that I'm gaining the advantage, so it will up the difficulty. Sometimes it might see that I'm struggling, so it will lower the difficulty. The idea of random, I think, is a word perpetuated in a world which has actually, I think, normalized mental health conditions to the point where they're almost, and I don't mean to be insensitive when I say this because I've had more diagnoses myself than I care to mention, including one that's called unspecified personality disorder, which isn't terrifically helpful, and all that resulted from that was being given pills that just didn't make me feel like myself. They made me, it switched off what made me me, and it didn't cure any of the ailments I was facing. That was a whole other thing, which have chemical imbalances within their brain that do need some treatment from medication. I think the proportion of people that actually need medical intervention, as it were, is incredibly small compared to the amount of people that are actually mentally ill or diagnosed as mentally ill. I think the problem is a lot of the time that these mental health conditions are almost perceived as fashion labels. They're almost seen as trendy, or this is the cool thing. Oh, so many people I know have got this mental health condition. It'd be pretty funky if I had it as well. It's like, well, no, that's not really how that works. If you have a mental health condition, it's not, you don't usually want to parade it around for everybody to know, and it's the sort of thing that isn't, I mean, maybe this is just my perspective than everybody's perspective. I just don't think it's a very common behavior to want to publicize a mental health condition as something that's cool, because it's not cool. I think normalizing the idea of them has been misconstrued. And I really don't mean to say that in the sense that people shouldn't talk about mental health. If anything, I think people should talk about their mental health more, because there are many, many people's mental health situations which aren't actually that unhealthy. They've been misled to believe they're unhealthy by a system that stands to benefit from the monetization of their mental health. And that's a lovely succinct checkmate. On to the next one. So as I was saying, mental health conditions to some extent really aren't, I don't think they're as prevalent as they've been made out to be. I think many of the mental health conditions that are advertised in the media as being, and actually that's a key word there, it's advertised in the media. It's almost, do you fit these descriptions? Have you been struggling with conditions A, B, and C and symptoms X, Y, and Z? And it's, a lot of the time the diagnostic criteria is so vague it can kind of apply to anybody. And I myself know many people that have not necessarily self-diagnosed, however they felt it's a little bit too easy to relate to the criteria in the DSM-5. And I think that's something that, if we play devil's advocate, that's something you could argue is what you might want to do if you were trying to create a medical industrial complex. So let's make it clear that the medical industrial complex I'm describing exists in a literal form in the mental health professionals and the pharmaceutical industry, and is somewhat perpetuated by social media because it creates a conversation around mental health conditions that doesn't look to necessarily alleviate symptoms or cure anything. It's just discussing them, and okay, they're there, let's discuss them. that's great. However, let's say you have cancer or diabetes or some sort of endocrinological disease, you don't really want to just treat it, you want to cure it if possible. It's great to put a cancer into remission, however, ideally you want to get rid of it altogether. I know the cancer doesn't necessarily specifically work like that. My medical expertise is limited to a few first aid courses, so let's not pretend I'm a doctor. Um, I just think that the idea of being mentally unhealthy, because that's what a mental health condition is. If you have a mental health condition, you are technically mentally unhealthy. That is the definition of it. That's what a mental health condition is supposed to be described as. And I'm trying to be more sensitive about it by describing them as mental health conditions rather than mental health disorders or diseases or anything like that. I think the word mental health condition in itself is a sort of euphemism for what's otherwise called a disease or a disorder, because technically it's neuroatypicality. It's not normal. It's not meant to be normal. It was never meant to be how a healthy mind functions. I'm not trying to say people that have been diagnosed with these things or feel that they're suffering from these conditions are unworthy of treatment in any way. If anything, the treatment of them makes a massive difference. I think the tricky thing I'm finding to express here is because I'm not wanting to insult or offend anybody. I just want to have the conversation. Because I think if we don't have the conversations, the situations never get discussed. If they never get discussed, they never really get resolved. They just become, it's like the elephant in the room people have in some situations where everybody knows something weird's going on, yet nobody quite knows the details of it. And I think to some extent, considering the amount of people I've talked to about this sort of thing that have not just agreed with me, they've come forth with their own experiences about it, and they've actually been quite forthright that the idea of mental health conditions as a fashion trend is quite common. So this is not just people I'm speaking to anecdotally in my social circles, this is in academic institutions, speaking to other people who've done psychology courses, other people who teach psychology courses, as well as people that are interested in learning about psychology personally. It's because of the breadth and depth of the people I've had these conversations with, it's what's made me more confident about speaking about this subject instead of feeling like I'm speaking about something that's too controversial to talk about. Because I think it actually makes a really big difference whether or not we understand our behaviors, our emotions, and our thoughts. Because I think you could argue actions are in there as well, like actions, behaviors, emotions, and thoughts. For the simplicity of it, we'll go with the triumvirate. Because the more we understand our behaviors, the more we understand our emotions, and the more we understand our thoughts. So depending on your school of thought with psychology, whether you're more biologically orientated, behavioristically orientated, cognitive, is not necessarily the point we're trying to get into here. We can go into that in the future if people are interested. Please let me know. I'm quite happy to talk about what you guys want to talk about. I just also want to balance it with what I want to talk about, because I think that's how good conversations go. And without getting too off topic, to sort of circle back to the idea of the professional cleaner's paradox is that, let's say for instance I'm a mental health professional, I'm speaking with another mental health professional, and we have a practice, and there's two of us, and we have 5 employees between us. Our 5 employees are all perfectly qualified, they've got all the certifications and verifications that you could possibly imagine that would be useful for their job, and they want to progress within the industry, and our company is something that's doing that for them. And let's say we have 100 staff, so there's 20 being seen by each of our 5 employees. Meanwhile, myself and my partner are dealing with more of the business side of things, as well as dealing hands-on with more complicated cases, because we're, in this scenario, the more experienced people. In this situation, if we've got 100 patients, and let's say they're all equally distributed amongst like cluster A, B, and C disorders, and general anxieties and depressions and things like that, if we understand that all of these mental health conditions are different, then eventually we'll get to the point where we understand, say for example, some of the most commonly occurring mental health conditions as anxiety and depression. Then once we understand anxiety and depression well enough, then we'll be able to communicate that to all of our patients who suffer from those symptoms, as well as be able to put forth information to other people to understand that you don't need to pay us for our advice, because this information is so commonly widespread. It should be common knowledge now. So for instance, many symptoms of mental health can be alleviated simply by improving your diet, exercising more frequently, having much better hygiene, which I think is a sorely underestimated and undervalued aspect of mental health, is your physical hygiene. I just need to say it. I don't mean to be rude to anybody. I just need to say it. As well as your sleep schedule and your socialization. I think those are the big 5 attributes. So that's diet, exercise, hygiene, sleep, socialization. Between those 5 aspects, so I'll put that on camera for you. So that's diet, exercise, hygiene, sleep, socialization. Once you have those 5 aspects under control, let's say for at least a month, a solid 30 days, preferably 60 to 90 days, because that gives you much more time to understand where you might, for want of a better term, relapse on unhealthy behaviors. Because once you understand your healthy behaviors, and say for example say for somebody that drinks too much alcohol, they start replacing alcohol with fruit juice, milk, water, fruit-related things to keep yourself healthy and happy. Then eventually you'll start understanding the behavioral traits that might tempt you towards alcohol are being replaced by the fructose and lactose in your fruit juice and your milk. So by understanding that, we could also relay that slightly to the pharmaceutical industry, in the sense that the chemical balances in our heads, it's difficult to understand for most people. I mean, it's not something I understand perfectly yet, and I don't think anybody within the industry would claim to understand hormones or neurochemicals perfectly, much less how they interact with all the various technologies that, as we know, do actually have an effect on our mental health. And I don't want to diverge too much from the original topic, because I think some interesting stuff's coming up. And it's part of why I do these podcasts, is because as much as I've thought these things through myself, and in my own head they've made sense, and then I've communicated them with people in my social circles, in my academic circles, and sometimes in professional circles as well, I still want to make sure that the information I'm communicating via these podcasts is easily digestible to people that haven't been to higher education facilities, or people that maybe dropped out of high school, or people that simply can't afford to continue their higher education. I don't want there to be a barrier to access that's monetary. I think it's one of the significant issues in the world, not just in the sense of the information I'm providing here from my perspective and my experience, as well as within the mental health industry. I think many people that just need somebody to talk to, because I know I caught myself there almost saying need professional help. And whilst there are some situations that would be best addressed by a professional with the experience and tools to deal with that, at the same time, I think many mental health professionals would be probably out of work if people were generally better friends to each other. If people had stronger social circles in their life, not just from their friends, from their family as well, and a more authentically supportive workplace therapeutic environment, because there are many, many places of employment that claim to be strong on mental health support that, when actually push comes to shove, aren't anywhere near as supportive as they claim to be. And there are people I know in my personal life that don't really like talking about their mental health with their colleagues, because they know it can place a stigma against them and actually hold them back from professional developments. So instead of relying on speaking to professionals to help us alleviate mental health situations or conditions, diseases, disorders, whichever word, tickles your pickle, I think the idea of people just being better to each other sorry, that feels like an oversimplification of be better to each other. The idea of being more supportive to one another isn't limited to the idea of being better friends. It's making the effort to understand even when you're not sure. So a personal experience I've had with one close friend and one jiu-jitsu training partner is that when I was talking about something that was really difficult for me to go through at the time, it was something that not only was I struggling to handle and manage, it was something I was struggling to express. Because as much as in my head I knew there was something causing distress, there was something causing pain, it was very difficult to put that into clear communication that other people were able to understand, which is what I think is the tricky part about discussing your mental health with friends and family, because with the best of intentions they might not understand. However, it's the same as with anything else. If you don't try to get better at it, you're not going to get better at it. And you need to be able to feel that you can trust the people in your life who are supposed to be your support network. So, for instance, without divulging too much of my personal information straight away, the relationship I've had with my father has not always lent itself well to emotional vulnerability. And that's something I've worked through my own time and has improved. However, it's not something that I felt at the beginning of speaking to my dad about more intricate subjects, shall we say, and intimate subjects. The word I'm looking for, intricate. I'm trying to like mask my emotion here, which I really shouldn't do. The point I'm trying to make is mental health professionals are useful. They're not a useless aspect of society anywhere. The validity towards a profession is entirely correct. The tricky thing is I think many people feel the need to speak to a mental health professional rather than simply speak to somebody in their life because they're not sure if the person in their life that they care about and they feel cares about them will still be there after they've communicated this potentially perspective shifting information. So once you've disclosed such perspective shifting information, it can alter the relationship irreversibly. And once that happens, then that might ruin the relationship forever. And I think that's an understandable anxiety that many people have when it comes to discussing mental health. I think being on the other end of that and not knowing how to help somebody you care about when you can see they're not just distressed, they're not just in pain, they're panicking and it's hard to calm them down and you don't know what to do in that situation. You don't want to make things worse. I understand that. I really, really understand that. The thing is though, it's, say for example, you're walking down the street, you're going to work, you're going to the shops, whatever. Let's say, for the sake of the scenario, a small child of primary school age, like single digits age, maybe they're like 6 years old, runs down the street, tears down their face, they're bawling and crying. You've got no idea what's going on. Are you just going to ignore them? Or are you actually going to try and help? I mean, I know personally myself, what's going on with the kid? Are there parents around? Is an older sibling around? Is there anybody that's, responsible for the child? Or is the fact that there's somebody who's meant to be responsible for the child not available to care for the child in such a manner that that's why the kid's distressed? Is it potentially that there's been a car accident around the corner I haven't seen, the kids screaming looking for help? Could it be that there's been a mugging? There's all sorts of scenarios we could run through here. The idea is that that child is looking for help. Me saying, well, I don't know how to help that. Good luck, kid. You're on your own. That doesn't solve the problem. It just ignores the problem. And if it's just going to... When you're ignoring the problem set in front of you, then is it actually going to help anybody significantly in the long term? So even though you could say in the short term ignoring the child makes your life simpler, because arguably, let's say the kid's coming to you for help because there's been a car crash, both parents are dead, everybody else in the other car's dead, they've got no idea what to do. Yeah, you could ignore that and go about your day and you'd probably have a simpler life for it. And then you start arguing, well, what's the moral behaviour here? What's the moral responsibility? And while that's a fascinating topic, I feel I'll get slightly distracted if we go too far into it. That could be something we discuss in future episodes. Again, please let me know if you'd like to talk about it. The issue I'm trying to point out here is that if your friend comes to you, especially if it's a close friend, somebody who, if you think about it, doesn't have many other people to talk to about this, they've chosen to speak to you specifically because you're the person they trust to speak to about this. And trust is such a valuable thing. It really is. I don't think I need to explain to anybody who's listening or watching this how important trust is in relationships. How it can make such a big difference as to whether or not a relationship lasts, as to how a relationship lasts, and what a relationship's likely to make of itself in the future. I think once people understand that a relationship is generally fundamentally built upon trust, then it's easier to understand why people come to each other in the first place. It's a tricky one, I have to put it that way. So, to sort of link those three together, is the professional cleaner's paradox is sort of similar to the professional therapist paradox. Is that if you're a mental health professional, and that was a blunder, Malcolm, you silly sausage. Well, thank you. If you're a mental health professional and the entire industry is designed on supporting people with mental health issues, to some extent, you might actually stand to benefit from people continuing to be mentally unwell. Which then brings me into something kind of similar to this. So, the things I see is perpetuating the medical industrial complex, so the mental health professional's dilemma, or the professional cleaner's paradox, however you want to call it. So, not just the mental health professional industry, so your doctors, your nurses, your counsellors, your psychologists, psychiatrists, therapists, everybody like that, as well as the pharmaceutical side of it all, because you're, for example, companies like Pfizer and Bayer, and I'll check out the names. I should have actually done that beforehand and checked out the names of these companies. Your Procters and Gambles, these massive companies that create medicine. I don't think Procter and Gamble makes it. Okay, so your Pfizer, for example, let's use them as an example. Pfizer makes a lot of medicines, have also been responsible for the largest fine as of 2020 and 2021, I think, which was about 2 billion US dollars. That's not a small fee whatsoever, and it was for faulty medical provisions. When there are companies that have a financial interest in people's physical and mental health, then surely when their mental and physical health is the source of income, then is it's not unreasonable to argue that there might be foul play afoot. The tricky thing is at this point it starts becoming a little bit speculative rather than supported by facts, and it's something I think if I was going to discuss speculative stuff like that further, I'd want to do it with other people, simply because that way I'm not just reverberating my own thoughts in my own echo chamber. So let's put that as an aside for now. We can come back to that later. Of if the medical industrial complex really is, if the medical industrial complex really is, shall we say, corrupt, then how would a corrupt medical industrial complex work? We could discuss that hypothetical. Because hypothetically, they'd want to perpetuate systems of mental unhealth. So, what's most likely to make somebody mentally unhealthy? Well, apart from giving them limited nutritional sources, limiting their physical exercise, limiting their ability to administer self-hygiene, interrupting their sleep and disrupting their sleep particularly, and preventing them from socializing. So we'd have to understand what aspects of modern society actually create those situations. What aspects of modern society force those forward? So now I'm getting a little bit more into thinking out loud rather than specifically, what's the word? Because none of this was rehearsed, it was just stuff that's come before and that I'm putting together. So I don't want to blame social media, it's just the first thing that comes to mind of this. I think in some aspect because social media is somewhat responsible for a lot of mental health situations. Social media definitely doesn't help a lot of situations, because I think apart from the fact of mental health conditions becoming like fashion brands, it's gamified social interaction, and I've noticed a very big difference, especially in younger generations, of how socialization takes place. So, what's the best way to phrase this? The term transactional relationship comes to mind, and it's something I've noticed is far more common in younger generations, simply because the younger generations haven't had a comparative to it. they don't necessarily understand the difference between what is acceptable behavior. And I don't mean acceptable behavior strictly in the sense of polite discourse. I mean acceptable behavior in the sense of there's more to socialization than is the phrase zero sum outcome? I don't want to use that incorrectly, it's just something that's coming to mind. So I've noticed quite a lot of the time, especially more so with younger generations that have grown up with this technology as normal. So for instance, when I was a kid growing up in East Scotland, the internet was kind of a big deal. Having internet in your house meant you were kind of fancy. It was kind of posh, which for anybody who's watching who doesn't understand that fancy and posh are just synonymous with rich or, wealthy or whatever. It was, yeah, it's just how it was. And even I remember when we got dial-up in the house, before broadband was even a thing, dial-up was, well, it was unprecedented. We had no idea how big a deal it was going to become for us. It was just, we had like I think it was called computer studies class, where it was basically what we did was like word processing and spreadsheets and stuff like that. So the idea of using the internet for anything more than just downloading a game was really weird. And that was, I mean, you could say maybe 20, not even that. Look, yeah, maybe 20 years ago or so. So I'd have been primary school age. We didn't really use the internet on the computers at that point. Everything we did on computers at school was almost entirely spreadsheet based. It was just letters and numbers and like Word document stuff. And even then, we still hand wrote most of our assignments. And that's something that. So I remember speaking to a colleague recently. It's not in my current job; it's in a previous job, where I think they were high school leaver age, so just about a decade younger than me, and they'd never known life without smartphones and broadband internet, and the idea of handwriting stuff was kind of unusual to them. It just, I don't want to say blew their mind, it just kind of was weird to them. And to me, the idea of growing up with YouTube in your pocket and Spotify on demand, which are, I think, two of the most frequently used and abused platforms, it just wasn't normal. And I think the acceleration of technology has got to the point where people don't necessarily understand how fast society is changing as a result of it, which is one of the reasons I think cyberpsychology is a really, really important field for people to study. As I've mentioned in previous episodes, and will mention again in future episodes, I understand it better, is our living algorithms. So there's something I came across recently in behaviorism. It's called melioration theory, and melioration theory kind of boiled down to the idea that we function algorithmically to find sustenance and survival. So once we find water, we look for food. Once we find water and food, we look for shelter. Once we find water, food, shelter, we look for security, and so on and so forth through Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And what I'm trying to sort of link this all together with is that with the mental health industry, as it is, the medical industrial complex, being able to basically codify emotions as a result of technology. So this is something I've discussed with friends recently that I think is actually kind of likely to happen, is eventually emotions are going to become codified. On a long enough timescale, with sufficiently advanced technology, we will be able to numerically codify all emotions. The entire emotional spectrum will be numerically quantifiable. And we can argue to an extent that's kind of already happening. Because if an algorithm is able to understand you well enough, like this chess algorithm is able to understand when I'm doing well versus when I'm doing badly, then it stands to reason that the algorithms from Alphabet and Amazon and Meta and Android and Apple and, you know, pick a brand name that relies on algorithms to drive its business forward, their understanding of human emotions, even if it's just from a marketing aspect, not just a content production aspect, has to be on levels far beyond what this basically lone researcher operating on a shoestring budget is doing. I mean, without trying to sort of over pontificate the point, if me basically researching stuff on my own because I find it interesting and because it helps me understand my psychology course better, as well as piece together a fascinating puzzle of society, if I'm able to logically put together this kind of stuff and discuss it with people where not only they're agreeing, they're able to add to the point and elucidate ideas for me and make clearer things that I don't understand, it stands to reason the people that are getting paid 6, 7 figure salaries, possibly 8 figure salaries, I don't know quite how far Silicon Valley and those technology giants go. 6 and 7 figure salaries is not unlikely at all. Sorry, I've just noticed it's 6, 7, 8, and that might be me being a bit algorithmic there. It's, I think it's naive to think that companies the size of, for example, Alphabet and Meta, Android and Apple, as well as Amazon, I think it's naive to think those companies aren't just aware of it, they're already making the most of it. They're already what I describe as intellectualizing, monetizing, politicizing, and weaponizing everything we do online. Which, when you're the company that stands to profit from keeping people on the internet all the time, you develop the app designer's quandary, for want of a better word. If the app designer wants people to be on their app all the time, then theoretically, the most productive code they can create is going to keep people online until they either pass out or have to go to the bathroom or need to stop because of work. So something I learned recently is that the behavior prediction models within these algorithms aren't just unprecedentedly precise in the short term, it's the precision they have in the long term. They're not just able to predict our behavior days or months or days, weeks or months ahead of time. It's getting closer to years, and I don't think it's unreasonable to say they might actually be predicting behavior close to decades ahead of time, especially with the younger generations. So, for instance, a child born within the past 10 years will likely never know the world to exist without smartphones and the electromagnetic spectrum signal. Whatever the correct terminology is for your 3G, 4G, 5G signals, your Bluetooth, your Wi-Fi's, all these signals, when they're interacting with the brain from such a young age, eventually, just like an alcoholic can logically deduce that well, if I go to work, I acquire money. If I go to work and acquire money, I can get booze. If I go to work and acquire money and then learn how to make cocktails, I can have fancy booze. And that progression of logic continues. Conscious or unconscious, the understanding of logic's still there. So the child I've seen several children in prams or strollers or whatever the correct word for it is, being pushed along. They're just given a smartphone or a tablet and they're just sat there looking at this thing. They're either playing a game or watching a video or scrolling through something. If that's all their mind ever knows, when they're most malleable, when they're most vulnerable to being programmed, you could say to an extent, in behaviorism we describe that as conditioning. The difference between conditioning and programming, I think, is just a semantic case of definition. Either way, the person's still being coded. So if our behavior is being coded to some extent, that all of our behavior is recorded as well as sorted into a sense where, okay, if users A through M all behave this way when provided this stimulus, then we know that users A through M are going to behave in this way when this stimulus is provided at this time of day, in this location, etc., etc., etc. which means we can extrapolate from that the algorithm, at least, if not the programmers, understands how to use human behavior to achieve its means. Which means if an algorithm is able to understand human behavior to such an extent that it achieves whatever its means are, it might be just simply by keeping people online longer, it might be to get more money out of them, it might be to sway them to a political agenda. For example, what happened to the whole Cambridge Analytica situation, which facilitated the election of Donald Trump as well as the Brexit campaign in the UK. It's not unreasonable to think that these algorithms are able to basically program your mind without you realizing. We're all aware of how deep advertising can affect people. I think everybody's aware to some extent that advertising affects the human population a little more closely than any of us would like to admit. The amount of times that, I mean, you could translate that to, what do you call them? Smart home devices. So your Alexas, your Google Plays, your Siris, I guess to some extent. Those, if the cameras are always watching and the microphones are always listening, which in those cases they tend to be, then all of your data we've seen has provided adverts to us, arguably could also be providing pre-programming to us, which has been specifically calculated to produce a specific result. What those specific results are going to be difficult to determine without seeing the actual code written. However, we can reasonably deduce that the idea of extracting value from us is the outcome. Whether that value is our personal data, our money, our allegiance to a political campaign, which to some extent you could also argue is allegiance to a country's patriotism, which is something I've noticed quite frequently, is so being somewhat of an... No, I think I'm speaking a little bit sideways when I say that one. The point I'm making is that when an algorithm has a vested interest in producing a specific outcome, it's going to do what it does because it's a digital piece. It doesn't have the human reasoning to know that what it's doing might be ethically wrong or right. That's just not how an algorithm really works unless it's specifically coded to understand that specific piece of criteria. So if that's the case, then if a mental health condition is going to get you more, comments, likes, shares and subscriptions, then people might be more likely to mention their mental health conditions. However, I think we're all quite aware that mental health conditions such as anxiety and depression are a bit more chic, they're a bit more in vogue than some of the more serious situations like schizophrenia or sociopathy, or even like your bipolars or borderline personality disorders. So then it becomes a question of, well, what's the craziest mental health condition I can at least claim to have or believe I have or interpret the symptoms as and not actually be ostracized from society. So the mental health fashionista thing it's difficult to discuss because sometimes these people are just capitalizing on the idea that, oh, I've got a mental health condition, it means I can get away with stuff. Not necessarily. For example, a genuinely autistic person isn't going to walk around parading their situation for the sake of getting more sympathy or whatever. They're just who they are. They're just gonna be themselves. When people sort of make a claim that I'm this, I'm the other, and almost use it as leverage in negotiations, to me it almost seems like they're using it as a manipulative tool. And I've noticed there's a difference between people, it's like people that continue using crutches long after the needs for the crutches disappeared because maybe they get a disabled parking space, or maybe people hold doors open for them, or they get let ahead in queues and stuff like that. It's disingenuous, and I think the simplest way to translate that information or convert the code, as it were, is the idea of stolen valor, which is something that was explained to me by a colleague who served in the British military of stolen valor is the idea of pretending you were in the military or in law enforcement or something like that to be able to claim the distinguishment. So, say for example, you lie about military service and say, "Oh, I was in Afghanistan or Iraq or wherever." These are just recent areas of the world where the British military was engaged in conflict with, and then you claim to have done service tours and all that. Then you're stealing valor from the people who were actually there and actually experienced that conflict and went through some pretty goddamn traumatic scenarios simply because you want to pretend that you're that special as well. And it's just, that's not how that works. That's, what's the word I'm looking for? It's disrespectful. And I think many people that claim to have mental health conditions aren't anywhere nearly as mentally unfit as they claim to be. I think much of the time they're just struggling to deal with real life. And again, I don't mean to be insensitive, insulting, or offensive when I say these things. I say it because I really mean it. I say it because that's what I've seen is people have become increasingly sensitive to things that I think because they don't have anything else to be outraged about. And outrage culture is something I've noticed that it's pushed a lot in social media, I think because an algorithm will push that to the top because it drives engagement. So if outrage is one of the emotions that drives engagement, then to some extent the algorithm is able to quantify outrage, which means that's a possibility that that's at least one emotion that's been codified and quantified in numbers. And if they're able to do it with one emotion, it's just a matter of time before they're able to do it with a second emotion, right? So if they can do it with two emotions, then eventually over time, all emotions will become numbers or strings of code, and everybody will be either programmable or able to understand how to program themselves. It's kind of a heavy topic. However, I think the more we discuss these sort of things, the better, because if people don't discuss this stuff, it's never going to get resolved. It's always going to be that elephant in the room that's ignored. It's always going to be brushed off as something ridiculous, and I just don't think that's helpful for anybody. I've always been quite firmly of the position that if you have a problem, you need to face it head on. You need to tackle it directly and actually do something to solve it. And it's just one of those things, isn't it? That's right. Yeah. A refreshing glass of water. If it looks a wee bit unclean water, it's because there's some turmeric and a vitamin C tablet in there. Turmeric I found is terrific for helping digestion, as well as because in the south of England there's quite a lot of limescale within the taps, which with Scottish tap water just tastes so much better. So if you're in the south of England, I highly recommend putting a little bit of turmeric into your kettle every time you boil it and over time you'll just notice how any other water source just doesn't quite taste right. And the vitamin C tablets I just think are a great way to sort of add a little bit of flavour to it in a healthy manner. Back to the topic at hand. I will officially endorse putting turmeric in your water. You won't notice it taste-wise in a bad way. It's just there. It's a very neutral flavour. Anyway, I've been through professional cleaners paradox, medical industrial complex, mental health fashionistas, codified emotions, algorithmically monitored, and perhaps inducible emotions. I think I've covered most of the main points. I would quite like to... I don't know, part of me wants to play one more chess game because I'm on this thing recently where I'm trying to understand how algorithmic behaviour is reflected in human behaviours, not just produced on the computer. And something I've noticed is that, well, a chess algorithm typically works, well, at least this chess algorithm tends to work in ratios, for example, 2 to 1, 3 to 2, 5 to 3, not just exclusively in prime numbers, you see, as well as just the way it is. they work in numbers because that's how computers understand code. I feel to some extent, I feel like I've reached a natural conclusion with this topic. So, whilst I've sort of summarised the stuff I want to talk about, and I think 50 minutes is generally a good time episode for this, there is something within me that wants to push a little further and hit. I see that, and hit the. Oh, lovely! I didn't even see that bit. Just hit the fourth one. So that's the tricky thing is, this is something I noticed the other day, is a lot of the time, it's a quote I got from Andrew Huberman, was most of the time you identify pioneers by the people who have arrows in their backs. And a way I've sort of deciphered that information and translated it to myself was that at first you might sound crazy, then you'll sound eccentric, then you'll sound controversial, then you sound weird, then you sound interesting, then you sound intriguing, then you sound normal, then what you've been saying all along has become common knowledge and nobody thinks it's weird. Which I think is a really common happening with any sort of development of technology and information. I think most of the world understands that. I think most of the world understands that mental health is a real thing and something that I think part of the difference between older and younger generations is how seriously mental health affects well-being, because I don't think older generations were unaware of the mental health aspects of today, and I think it's a very insensitive quality of many people in the younger generations to just assume that quote-unquote boomers don't know what anxiety or depression is. I think they're actually very aware of those things, they just had different coping mechanisms because they didn't ascribe a diagnostic criteria to understanding it. They just, it's feeling a bit rubbish today. Oh, maybe it's caused by this, maybe it wasn't. That's okay. It is what it is. I'll deal with it somehow. I'll get through. And I guess what I'm trying to say is, it's the tricky thing, right? Because I was about to say younger generations are more sensitive, and I think they are. I really do think they are. However, no, not even however. I think they're just more sensitive. I think they're slightly wussier, for want of a better term. And that's not entirely their fault, because the difficulties that their predecessors faced were deliberately alleviated by their predecessors because they didn't want they didn't want their descendants to face those same problems. So, for instance, a lot of the technologies we have in the modern age, we only have because there were problems in preceding years that people didn't want their kids to face, which is kind of understandable. It's one of the reasons most technology gets developed is to solve problems so you don't have to face a problem anymore. So, as an example, okay, something that's coming to mind quickly is the birth control pill. I don't know why that's coming to mind first. It might be just because I just took a queen. It might be because it's a topic I've noticed has made a very big difference in, for want of a better word, promiscuity. I think people have become more comfortable with the idea of casual sex, which I have mixed feelings about, because I think on one hand, from a psychological perspective, the more sexual partners you engage with, the harder it is to pair bond with people, and the more you just see sex as like full-on sexual intercourse is just a normal thing as shaking your hand. It's also, there's been a lot of studies which support this as well, was it 80% of marriages which began as both partners, or at least one, I think the women having 5 or less sexual partners went on to be happy marriages. Conversely, when it was more than 5, it was only that remaining 20% were generally unhappy marriages, which I think's, I I'd need to double check which study said that. I just know that that is a real study that was peer reviewed and officially published and everything. And I think that lends into the idea of the mental health stuff quite interestingly, because the idea of promiscuity is, no, before that, sorry, the birth control pill is a form of it's a, I don't know if it's specifically a pharmaceutical. It is, however, a synthetically created substance. I was gonna say drug. When I say drug, my mind tends to go to stuff like, cannabis, coke, and whatnot. It's interesting though, because on one hand, the idea of a birth control pill was to improve the freedoms experienced by the entire female spectrum, as it were. I was going to say women specifically. I'm really not trying to step on any toes to say if the term women accidentally offends somebody. Because, well, this lends into what I was saying earlier about this modern generation being more sensitive, is if you use the incorrect pronouns or something like that, people can get offended. Some people get offended to the point where they want to destroy your livelihood for what can very genuinely be an innocent mistake. And I just think that's excessive. Sometimes an innocent mistake is just an innocent mistake. And at the same time, I don't think anybody has the right to tell anybody else what to say. It's just not how. It's just not how a civilized society should function. There's a difference between asking for sensitivity on a topic which might cause pain and wanting to actually control somebody's speech. So, for instance, the thing is, as soon as this thought's come into my head, I feel like I'm exploiting the person that's coming to my head to produce a more interesting conversational topic. And it resonates slightly because the person I'm thinking of is a trans person. And I've seen many people bring forth the argument that most trans people are seen by the medical industry as cash cows. Like, I know in the United States, all the surgeries and hormonal costs can usually end up being more than six figures. The most recent number I saw was 120,000 US dollars. In the United Kingdom, I think quite a lot of that is subsidized by the National Health Service, which, does change the scenario slightly. It's just, the tricky thing with a lot of, is it transgenderism or transsexual? I'm going to say trans people to avoid accidentally saying the wrong thing, because I don't want to make this a politically charged podcast. I'm trying to remain as neutral as possible. I really, really am. And the tricky thing is I think there will be some trans people who are put through the whole process, who might be suffering from what was known as gender dysmorphia, or it might be genuinely something they're experiencing as a phase rather than who they are. And it's tricky because the one trans person that I can say I know, and again, I feel like I'm exploiting them to create a more interesting conversational subject. And I don't want to exploit them for that. I just know that the person I know appreciates being addressed by the pronouns that they've feel they were born as or chose to become, or however they wish to define that, because my perception of that is different. I don't understand it very well, and I don't wish to speak about something I don't understand in a sense that may unintentionally cause pain. That's not what I'm about whatsoever. It's just that somebody else I know that went through that, I know was a confused and scared child that I think just kind of went along with it because they knew they'd get more attention from their parents for it. And it's rough to say, and part of me is scared that they're going to see this one day and hear me saying that. It's just, I've seen it before with people across the LGBT spectrum where they almost feel like they're trapped in this identity that they thought was them for a short period of time, and they refuse to come back, not come out. What's the phrasing? they commit to it, like, and please pardon the phrasing here, I'll clarify in a moment. They commit to the lie because they don't want to be thought of, they don't want to be made fun of for going back on what they thought they were. And that's hard. I understand that. It's like if you really thought that's who you were and you committed to it and you make such a life changing decision as gender reassignment surgery, and then you find out that, oh, no, it's not actually who I was. I made a mistake. Like, mistakes can be forgiven. It's not the end of the world. It really isn't. The problem is, I think, there's a tricky encouragement to that almost wants to create more trans people than there actually are for the sake of representation. In the same way that I see a lot of the time in media, there seems to be almost, and again, I'm not trying to be insulting or offensive or anything when I say this, it almost seems that a lot, especially in stuff that's been made since, maybe since 2020, maybe since 2016, a really direct push to improve representation across the spectrum. And I think it's just key to remember that the LGBT community is only about 2% of the population, 3% at most. It's not actually anywhere near as much as I think people have been led to believe. And it just confuses me slightly that if you want to have an accurate representation of the population, or do you want to have representation of your team? Because I think if you're more interested in having representation of your team, then does it matter that much if your team is accurately represented, or do you want them to be overly represented? And something, it's not that it worries me as much as it confuses me, is that there are some people who seem to be more interested with having their team over-represented than accurately represented. And I understand that to some extent. So let's say you're a football fan. Hypothetically, you want everybody to be a fan of your football team, or your rugby team, or your favourite MMA fighter, or your favourite rock climber, or, pick a sport. In the same way that if there's a specific musician, or just if we just say artist generally, artist, scientist, athlete, business person, political figure, religion, whatever, of course you're going to want other people to be on your team if that's really so critical to you that that's the right way to see the world, or that's the best team, or that's just who you love the most for whatever reason. It makes sense you want other people to see the world as you do. I just think the idea of trying to convert everybody to your way of thinking doesn't actually, if you're having to force other people to think as you do rather than just allowing them to come to it by their own natural conclusions, you're not actually being that convincing, you're just being manipulative. Which, to tie that, let's go another round and explore that thought further, because those are thoughts that I've had in my head for a long time that I haven't said out loud, and part of me knows that, oh, hang on, there, there we go. Who wants me to go to 6? Yeah, 6 got you back. Part of me wants to discuss stuff at that level because part of me knows that the algorithm responds to that stuff. And I think on an unconscious level, because I want my podcast to be popular, it comes forward like that. And part of me was honestly a little scared to discuss that stuff because it's not that I'm scared of being cancelled, it's that I don't want to hurt people's feelings unnecessarily. So a little bit of background information about myself is I've been in sports for pretty much as far as I can remember. Like, I've competed in swimming, football, martial arts, rugby, powerlifting, basketball, climbing a little bit, and probably some other stuff that I'm forgetting. I've done sports for most of my entire life, so the idea of meritocracy is kind of ingrained in me, kind of obviously. Like if you're the best at something, it'll be kind of obvious, and every once in a while you can kind of see who's getting a little bit of help from their referees, or sometimes that happens. It's one of the reasons that when I was powerlifting, I made a very specific point to compete in a drug-free federation because personally, I think that if you want to take steroids, do you? I'm not going to stop you. I just think there should be a clear distinction between drug-free competitors and drug-taking competitors. And it's like that old adage about the Olympics. Like, I really want to see an ordinary person go up against an absolutely jacked to the limit person just to see what would happen. Anyway, just getting off topic is the stuff I was talking about beforehand. The like the trans stuff and the representation in the media. I think to some extent the media industrial complex quite intensely pushes people to think a certain way. And I really don't want this to become overtly political because once it becomes political, it becomes polarizing. And once it becomes polarizing, there's almost a demand that you only support one point of view rather than either point of view. And I want to speak my mind and not feel like I'm punished for not agreeing with whatever the dominant political ideology is. And it's something I've noticed with it's becoming harder and harder to discuss politics with anybody because as soon as it comes up, it's like the whole sports thing. They want you to agree with them. So something I made a really big effort with during the whole 2020 fiasco. So I ended up, and I know this is kind of divergent from the original topic, so I will try and circle it back around. Is I ended up going on 4chan, on a certain anonymous online Mongolian throat singing board far more than Reddit or Facebook or anything like that. And I ended up deleting everything. Like the only social media account I still have left is my Instagram one, which I'm keeping because there's a weirdness about it that I noticed that when I stopped using Twitter, other things in my life tried to push me back to Twitter. When I deleted my Facebook account, things tried to get me back on Facebook. So the only one I have, like I deleted Snapchat, and yet for some reason that software is hard grained into my phone. I don't know how to delete it. The app's not showing anywhere there. I just can't delete it. It's the same with the Instagram one. So I'm also testing a theory that I'm getting off topic, that if I subscribe or follow specific accounts, what happens to my account? Does it produce anything interesting? I feel like I've not lost the thread of what I'm talking about. I've just gone on I've gone on a small meander. Anyway, what I was talking about beforehand is the idea that mental health conditions have become fashion labels for a lot of people, and they'd rather be seen almost as mentally unhealthy because by having the label that the mental condition ascribes to them, it puts them into a social circle which will accept them. When really being mentally unhealthy doesn't. If being mentally unhealthy is what brings you social status, you really need to reassess what your social circles validate, as it were. I'm starting to get a little bit focused on the chest now. The point I'm making is that when your mental health is one of the primary points of, when it's one of the main topics of conversation, when it's the main subjects of discussion, is your mental health. Not in a sense of dealing with it or coping with it, just in the sense of it's there. And then all of a sudden you get healthy, what do you talk about? And this is where I think it connects the social media stuff to the mental health industry, is that when you're no longer suffering from the mental health conditions, well, what do you do? Do you continue, like, so if you no longer engage with the unhealthy behaviors, and you no longer interact with the quote unquote toxic people, and your diet's improved, you're exercising more, your hygiene's better, you're sleeping better, you're socializing in better ways. Once you've done all of that, then you start realizing that you notice the patterns in other people which are unhealthy, in the same way that an athletic person is going to notice. I can phrase that better. A successful athlete will notice the patterns of unsuccessful athletes and know not to imitate those, in the same way that they'll see the patterns of healthy athletes and imitate those, in the same way that a business person will learn a lot from a business people will learn many great things from successful business people as well as from unsuccessful business people. So with your mental health, the better you get at looking after your own mental health and managing all of it, the more you notice the patterns of behavior in healthy people, and the more you try to emulate those healthy patterns. And eventually you get to the point where you notice that if you emulate the healthy patterns well enough, you don't actually have any unhealth. Well, don't have any is an exaggeration. You have fewer unhealthy patterns to worry about. And eventually it gets to the point where, oh, I've solved most of the significant mental health issues. So now there's not as many left to resolve. There's a few, and I'll get there bit by bit. So then it becomes the same idea of, well, if I notice that I've gotten rid of most of my unhealthy mental health habits, I've alleviated those patterns, then you notice the unhealthy patterns in other people in the same way that an algorithm is going to recognize that your behavioral patterns have changed as well. Because when an algorithm is able to recognize a behavioral change, it will adapt and produce different content, as it were. Excuse me. So if an algorithm then starts producing different results because it's noticed that your behavioral patterns have changed, does that mean that the algorithm has recognized that your mental health is improved, or is the algorithm simply recognizing a difference in behavioral pattern? And I think that distinction is quite interesting, because if it's noticing there's a difference in behavioral pattern, then it knows that there's something to change. And if it's noticing there's a difference in behavioral pattern specifically due to mental health improvement, then that means that the algorithm is aware of your mental health to a sufficiently accurate state that it knows when you're healthy or unhealthy. So it then becomes a matter of trying to understand whether or not the algorithms recognize or can distinguish healthy behaviors from unhealthy behaviors, and what they do in regards to those. Oh, excuse me. Hmm. 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 So algorithms can recognize behavioral changes, which means algorithms can recognize health pattern changes, which means algorithms have the capability of distinguishing behavioral patterns as a sense of health patterns, which means if the health pattern is distinguishable, that means algorithms such as alphabets, metas, androids, apples, amazons, all these algorithms, chess.coms, Wikipedias maybe even to an extent, if these algorithms are able to identify behavioral changes, and then we can accept that they can identify mental health pattern changes, then the technology already exists for the algorithms to be able to deduce whether or not somebody's mentally healthy or unhealthy. It's just a matter of implementing code which can identify what is healthy or unhealthy mental health. Of course, it would have to account for cultural differences and things like that, although we are quite aware that the cameras and microphones can pick up on facial cues and body languages and vocal intonation, which means all of that is part of data sets collected on human beings. And if all of that data is collected on human beings, then it's already if the data has already been collected, then it's not an issue of it's sorting it. So you'd have to put it some sort of machine learning process to teach the algorithm how to identify healthy and unhealthy behavior. And once that's done, then you just need to improve the algorithm, which is far simpler said than done, I know. However, if when the algorithms writers, if I just say coders, when the coders are able to correctly distinguish between healthy and unhealthy behavioral patterns, then they're able to design code which can create healthy and unhealthy hang on. Yeah, no, bells. Basically, it means that algorithms already have the potential to identify healthy and unhealthy behavior, and that the identification of healthy and unhealthy behavior it's alright, we'll rematch that. Okay, so if an algorithm is able to correctly identify behavioral changes, then that means that an algorithm is able to detect the triggers of behavioral changes, which means to some extent it knows when you're about to feel worse, which means it knows what behaviors before that made you feel worse, which means it knows what behaviors, emotions and thoughts predicated feeling better or worse. So then it becomes a question of understanding how deeply an algorithm understands behavioral patterns. So, for instance, if we take Alphabet and Meta, who control Google, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and a bunch of other stuff, I mean, mostly everybody in the West, pretty much everybody that has a smartphone will have encountered services by one of those two companies, if not uses one of those company services on a daily basis. So we need to understand how deeply those businesses' prediction models work. Now we know they happen days ahead of time because the adverts they produce to us are able to detect information from us the same day and continue. Because if they're advertising stuff to you at a subconscious level, the tricky thing is proving it. Because when you see the patterns anecdotally, it's pointing them out, it's empirically proving them is the tricky part. Okay, well if a behavioural pattern is predictable days ahead of time, if not weeks, months, years, decades, then a behavioural pattern is also able to distinguish between repeated patterns and one-off patterns, which means it can then determine which conditioning patterns, so what forms of classical conditioning were action that successfully produced the desired response. So then, if a person were then to operantly condition themselves in response, they'd be able to either nullify or alter the effect of the behaviours caused. Bother. Excuse me. That was rude. I'm sorry. That was. The tricky thing is, as I get into the more difficult levels of this chess, my focus diverges slightly from what I'm talking about to what is happening on the board. It's interesting though, because the better we understand the algorithm, the better we understand what the algorithm is trying to do. The better we understand what the algorithm is trying to do, the better we understand how algorithms function. So, I'm playing very defensively here. So if we know an algorithm is, I think they try to intellectualize, monetize, politicize, and weaponize us. But at the very least, they try to monetize and politicize us, and I don't think anybody would disagree with that. So if we can all agree to some extent that there's deliberate attempts to monetize and politicize everything we do, then there must be efforts put in place to induce that monetization and politicization, which means of the code that induces the monetizable behaviors, then there must be a distinction between successful monetizing campaigns and politicizing campaigns. Yeah, so if there's a way to distinguish the word, to distinguish intellectualization campaigns from monetization campaigns, from politicization campaigns, from weaponization campaigns, then at that point, once we can distinguish which does which, then it's possible to understand the different tactics of which. Because as soon as you can identify there's a difference in what this campaign's outcome is, then, well, to be fair, the tactics might be the same, it just might be the triggers. Intriguing. Excuse me. I probably should have ended this after the fourth one. I could, if people are still listening and watching, thank you very kindly. I do appreciate it, and I hope what I've been saying has been making some sense. Please make sure you just tell me what's going on. If there's something you want to hear more of, I can talk about it more. I'm not going to know what you guys are interested in unless you tell me. As much as I've gotten better at reading body language in real life, well, in this scenario, there's only so much I can read. So, because at this point, I'm not. Is reciting the right word? I'm not regurgitating talking points I've been through a few times and written about, I'll say extensively, more than a few times. I'm literally just letting my thoughts come to be, which it's one of the reasons I like doing this chess format thing, is because at the lower difficulty settings it's much easier for me to think rather than interact with the board. At the higher difficulty settings I have to put more concentration in. However, what I find interesting, and one of the reasons I chose to do the chess with it, is one, because I think it makes it more visually stimulating for myself as well as you guys, is because I think there's a patterns in there'll be a correlation of pattern, no matter how absurd this sounds to some people, between, for example, pawns, knights, bishops, rooks, queens, kings. Whichever piece I'm moving, pawn or piece, there will be something within me that associates it one way or the other. For instance, I've noticed that when I think of bishops, I tend to think of slightly more, I don't know, I get the whole association between I was going to say the allegations of the Catholic Church. They're beyond allegations. Most people know what happened, or perhaps still happens with parts of the Catholic Church. We don't need to go too far into the details there. Hey, look, a bishop moved. And on the same note, it's like when I think knights, because I describe them as moving in an L shape, I think lessons and stuff like that. And I think part of it is just understanding what unconscious assignments I've made between the pieces and patterns. In the same sense, it won't be simply just bishops and knights. It'll be the king side versus the queen side, as well as the light square bishop versus the dark square bishop, and things like that. Because I've noticed a lot of the time when I'm playing chess, either on the computer or across the board, if it's in a scenario where I'm able to think about... So okay, let's start with stuff like if I'm on the computer and I'm producing this podcast, producing a podcast, making a podcast, a lot of the time, and maybe you guys notice these patterns better than I do because it's external input, sorry. You'll notice maybe if every time I move a pawn I speak about one specific topic, or perhaps my intonation changes, or maybe my head changes direction, or some denomination of physical or vocal communication changes. In the same sense that I've noticed when I'm listening to something on in the background, whether it be a podcast, it might be music. It doesn't matter if it's music, just a simple, people in the room around me talking. So whether it's just music, podcast, people in the room talking, of those three things, I noticed that it's almost as if it's a tuning frequency, like a radio, which I notice more in real life with the physical pieces than I do with the computer. I just also notice it with the computer. And I think it does actually speak to what we associate the pieces with, as well as the layout on the board, as well as, for example, the color complex we're on. For example, I've got the nice strong pawn chain up here going from F7 to B3, and now I've got that reinforced. That entire queen side is kind of, well, god damn. I'm pretending to talk about chess like I'm good at it, when really I just really enjoy it. And I think I just blundered a bishop whilst focusing on pawn structure. So how does that translate to mental health stuff? Well, it's, I've made such a focus on presenting my life to the world in such beautiful, fancy way that I ignored something kind of critical, in the same sense of maybe you put on a nice cologne every single day, but you're not showering daily. In the same sense of, oh, you had that lovely, expensive, fancy coffee every day. Have you actually eaten anything of substantiation? Like, when was the last time you ate some eggs, or some chicken, or tuna, or whatever? Or some fruit and vegetables, for God's sake. In the same sense of, okay, so you've improved your diet, you're exercising more, you've got your hygiene, your sleep alright, your socialization, okay, so you're still hanging out with the same people. Maybe those are the people that are causing problems in your life. So for instance, me focusing on moving the pawns rather than the pieces, especially even though we're on move 29, like, my knight's still trapped in the corner, that bishop's kind of buggered, that rook's not terrifically useful, that pawn's hanging, the queen's dead, because I've been more focused on the conversation than I have on the pieces. Meanwhile, if you notice on the white side, you've got the two rooks are connected, even if they are kind of defensive. The queen and the bishop are both on the dark square complex together. That knight, if it moves down here, it's still covered, which means my queen can't do a huge amount of target. If it moves over here, it's out of the way. I guess that's one of the smarter places I can put that. And I just think this ties in. I should have seen that coming. I'm looking at my notes I made beforehand to see if there's any talking points I can bring up to sort of bring this back into what we were talking about earlier. I think just the conversation's evolved, and it's just I'm talking a bit more about chess now, and I enjoy talking about chess, even though I am clearly not great at it. Um, and it is what it is. Doesn't mean we can't enjoy it. I think the idea of codified emotions is interesting, especially from the chess standpoint, and I'm going to go a little wackadoodle here. Well, I say wackadoodle. Let's do something bold. To some extent, right? If emotions become numerically quantified, then that means eventually emotions will be pieced together by code that's able to produce a specific output, like a script, right? Like, let's say you've written a script because you want your... Alright, let's say I'm the director of the chessboard and I'm not playing as white or black, I'm coordinating with the second director, which in this case is the chess engine, to produce a performance, whether that's a chess ballet or an opera or a musical or, you know, just a good old-fashioned theatre production. Or maybe we're doing it in front of cameras and we're making a show or a film or anything like that. You understand the concept I'm putting across here. What that means is that to some extent, let's say each of these pieces from my side and each of the pieces from the other side, as well as the pawns, the way they all interact with each other, instead of limiting them to the idea of being opposition, they're working in harmony to produce a specific result. Which means anybody that's watching me play against this algorithm might have an induced emotional response, which is not solely because of my communications to you vocally or the body language you've seen on camera. It might be that you have a response to this which is as a result of the patterns you see on the chessboard. I know that seems a little out there. It's not impossible. So say for instance you're an avid chess player and have been since the age of 2. Well, you're going to know that this position is not very common and probably in white's favour rather than black's, simply because of the material advantage. It's also interesting because technically my pawn line could push forward quite hard here. At the same time, I need to connect that rook to the queen to keep them alive. So what I'm trying to say with the whole codified emotion thing is, eventually, if algorithms are able to turn emotions into strings of code, then that means algorithms will be able to induce emotional responses via code, which means the entire emotional spectrum will become... I understand the concept in my head and I'm trying to put it into words, so bear with us. Basically, the algorithms would be able to play chess with our emotions to produce the desired outcome. So for instance, we could argue that Alphabet and Meta, their algorithms, because of the market share they have on our endocrine systems and neurotransmitters, the nervous system, because of the market share they have on us, they'd be able to know that, okay, hang on, if, let's say, Alphabet has the dominant market share on my organism's living algorithm. So if you're not aware of amelioration theory, Google that, it's fascinating. And it understands that to some extent my internal algorithm will prioritize milk before it prioritizes fruit juice, not just because I really enjoy milk, because of the higher protein content and the stabilization of having healthy fats in my diet for my hormonal profile. It's quite a cheap and effective way to get a lot of calories in, which for anybody that enjoys physical activity is quite aware that economically efficient use of calories is one of the best ways to do anything. I think that made sense. It made sense in my head, and if it doesn't to you, I apologise. It is what it is. It's basically this night's going to save the day, is what's going to happen here. Okay. The night is very. Thank God for that. Alright, so if an algorithm's able to start playing with your. Okay, that could actually be a format for the future episodes. So people that are still listening and watching, thank you. If the first few rounds I do are my pre-prepared thoughts, so what I've noted down, and I piece them together in a way that makes sense, and then as I get through it all, eventually I start producing new works. So at the start of it, it's rehashing and reciting stuff to the point where I understand it more thoroughly and I can relay that information to you guys. And then as it moves forward, then I get into uncharted territory, as it were, which reminds me of something I'm going to say in a minute. Then eventually I start thinking new thoughts, creating new thought patterns, creating new trains of thought. Because something I've noticed is that when I was exclusively writing everything down, it helped put what I call my trains of thought onto tracks. Because anybody that's written on lined paper, it's like train tracks. So by putting the train of thought onto tracks, and I noticed that when I do it out loud with words, there's less. It's a less. People that do make a lot of art will understand this. Is sometimes when you have limitations placed onto you, for example, as a drummer, when you take, let's say you have your drum kit with 6 toms, 2 kicks, and 18 cymbals, if you have all of that in front of you, it's very easy to create something fairly original, or at least interesting. If you reduce that, so you've just got a snare, a hi-hat, and a kick, are you still able to create something cool? It's the same sense of like, okay, I can write this, and I've got the paper, and I can put an idea there and save it together, and put an idea there and save it there. And when I'm speaking out loud, I've noticed that my eyes, not just dart around the chessboard at various pieces in the setup and understanding that, it's understanding. For example, I have a monitor here, I have my laptop here, I have an old monitor there with some paper notes written on top of it, as well as some notes on my wall in front of me there. I have a chess set here, smaller chess set there. I mean, I could describe the entire layout of my room. The point is, my eyes dart around. And yeah, so basically it's the idea of putting trains of thought into tracks. And the thing I was going to say beforehand is I was trying to understand levels of organization from a biologist perspective. So I was taught this, it's the idea that cells cells become tissue because I might get this wrong, however the general concept is correct. Cells become tissues, become organs, become organ systems, become organisms, become populations, become biospheres. Kind of, it's that kind of like the levels of organization. You could have a hamlet to a village to a town to a city to a county to a region to a country to a continent to a planet to a star system to a universe to a multiverse. You get the idea with it. And I was trying to think, well, if that translates between the various sciences, so for example, how biology can boil down to chemistry, chemistry can be reduced to physics, and physics is essentially maths. Well, there must be slightly more to it. And I was thinking that potentially, well, sociology kind of becomes psychology. Psychology, I think, personally, will eventually be boiled down to biology, which chemistry is physics is math. Math is its own language, so to some extent, math is a form of linguistics. Linguistics is a form of semiotics. Semiotics is the art of what linguistics is to languages, semiotics is to symbols. It's kind of just languages in a more abstract form. And I figured, well, that's just cartography. And once you understand it's kind of all cartography, you're just either mapping out uncharted territory, or you're redesigning an existing map, or you're reading a map and trying to understand the terrain of it all. It just all boils down to cartography and understanding that whatever landmarks you assign significance on the map, from your perspective, are going to be a really big deal. However, there will be landmarks which are essential to everybody. So, for example, in language, if I'm speaking with correct grammar, then I'm following the layout of the map to navigate the terrain in such a way that people will understand what I say. However, the actual words I use, for example, the way I'm communicating the information on the map or the vehicle I'm using to traverse the terrain might be slightly different. So for example, if I was speaking to this to people in the social sciences, I'm likely to use different terminology than people I'd speak to about this in STEM fields. And I'm not trying to say one's better than the other. I'm just saying. So because a biologist might use different words to a chemist, to a physicist, to a mathematician, in the same way that different kinds of engineers, whether they be social engineers or mechanical engineers, are going to understand the terminology differently. However, if they understand the concept the same, then everybody comes together, everybody understands, everybody profits from it. Profit, I don't mean exclusively in the financial sense. I think profit is a really versatile word when you think about what it can mean. So, for instance, if I start speaking about profit in the sense of I've spoken to somebody about something I find interesting, they found it intriguing, we both talk about it, they've taught me something, I've taught them something, we've both profited from that and gained more knowledge as a consequence. So basically what I'm trying to say is that all the codified I got excited there. Basically there's levels of organisation to all of this. So if there's levels of organisation to all of this, and that stands to reason that whatever level I'm understanding at is just a level. I don't know if it's the top level, I don't know if it's the bottom level. The point stands is it's a level, isn't it? So once I understand it's a level rather than the level, then Scheiße. If I understand that I'm on a level rather than the top level or the middle level, instead of focusing on going higher or lower, I just focusing on understanding my level, because it's the same way as teaching anything. Like the concept you teach to a beginner, the master is still trying to perfect. There'd just be more nuances to it. So for example with chess, the idea of getting pieces out development-wise early, most people are taught that from a very young age. In the same sense that when you're trying to improve your diet, you think, okay, well, fruits and veg are great, proteins are great. Protein is actually a really good way to substantiate your satiation level. Fancy way of saying it makes you feel full for longer. However, explaining that to a complete beginner of nutritional science, for want of a better term, it's unnecessarily complicated. You could just say to them, okay, you need to understand calories in versus calories out. Calories in is whatever you eat, calories out is your expenditure. In the same way that if you're budgeting with money, you need to understand what your income is versus what your expenses are before you start worrying about macronutrient breakdowns or investment strategies, for example. In the same way that as you get a bit more advanced with it, you start talking about more complicated ways to discuss it. So, for example, with chess, the development I've got here, I've created a Ruy Lopez attack. I can castle quickly, which is quite a common idea in the Ruy Lopez. However, me knowing that as a common idea in the Ruy Lopez is perhaps one level beyond the absolute beginner who knows that castling early is generally quite a good idea. We're on move 5, so maybe we castle, maybe we don't. The question is, what do we do instead? I really like this idea because it allows that bishop to come through there. I'm kind of enjoying this aspect of how the podcast starts with me talking about stuff that I've already had in my mind originally, and then it's having like a written work that then becomes a freestyle, because theoretically the whole thing's just one really long freestyle. Because I don't know, I like talking, and I've noticed this is an hour 43:23 now, so it's the longest podcast I've ever made, and I'm enjoying myself. And that's kind of why I started doing this in the first place, because I'm enjoying it. I wanted to think out loud. I wanted to speak about stuff I'm passionate about, because it's something I find really common is that people aren't super comfortable with talking about heavy topics. Many people don't like talking about heavy topics, and the weird thing is I found there are proportionately more people that do like talking about heavy topics. The tricky thing is once there are very few people in the world that you'll be able to talk about stuff at a very deep level for a very long period of time. And when you find those people, you keep them around. They are more valuable than any paycheck or any award or anything else you'll ever receive. Trust me on that. 100%. The tricky thing is finding those people in the first place. And it's the idea of putting out the energy you want to receive. So if I speak to the world in the sense that I want to talk about heavier topics, I want to engage in more complicated conversations, I want to have more detailed discussions, I want to have more elaborate, I'm thinking another one with E because I had 2 alliterations there, elaborate entanglements of enunciation, go with that, then I just think I think it's fun. I like talking. I think communication generally is one of the most important things about being human. I think that talking. Okay, here's something I've also found really interesting recently is how body language has started becoming one of the most significant forms of communication. I've noticed that better I get at anything, whether it's arts, science, sport, business, governance, religion, family matters, anything like that, which is one of my systems level of governance for understanding chess. Which, if you ever heard Mikhail Tal's quote of art, chess first and foremost is an art. It makes sense to me because it was an art, and then you get people like Steinitz and Lasker, which was sort of more scientifically, and it's only really modern. You could really like the idea of calling it a sport. I get, however, it's an art and science first. Is those levels of governance help you understand where you are contextually within a conversation. So, for instance, if you're able to speak to somebody in a really abstract manner and you both kind of know what the other one means and what they understand, however, somebody else came along that have no idea what you're talking about, not because of technical know-how or anything, just because it's a weird conversation, then you're kind of in the artistic. If isn't that scientific bit where you can explain it to the other person without them having to interpret what the art is meant to be, then perhaps you move forward to the scientific level of it all. And at that point where it starts becoming a point where one side is making more sense than the other, well then is it the competition of ideas, or is it the idea that one idea genuinely has more merit than the other, or is that third party's perspective supporting one side or the other? How are they supporting that side? Is it because, for instance, if it's sports teams, are they local to one side? Did a family member support one side? Things like that. And it just becomes a point of communication where everything's communication. It really is. And this is why I think psychology is such an important topic. It's also why I think the idea of mental health professionals being out of a job if people were better friends is actually a really, really significant talking point, which I think a lot of people are very scared to talk about, is the idea of, well, the world's kind of fecked up. And because the world is fecked up, it means that of all the things going on in the world, there's only so much we can do to fix. And so there's only so much we can do to fix, then we have to focus on fixing things we're actually able to fix rather than just running around willy-nilly trying to fix anything and everything we come across. Which is something I think I'm personally not great for. I've had problems in the past where I try and solve everybody else's problems except my own. And I think that's a really from my own selfish perspective, it's not terribly conducive to only solve my own problems simply because, sorry, to solve everybody else's problems except my own, because then who's there to solve my problems? And I've got to start solving my own problems, which I do. Bit by bit, we're getting there. It's the thing is, when you need to solve your own problems, it's sometimes you need somebody else to solve your problem, or you need to potentially hire somebody to help you solve the problem because they're better at it than you are. However, if you're not in a position to afford somebody to help you solve the problem, well then the likely way you're going to solve the problem is by whatever affordable means are available to you. So if the affordable means available to you are speaking to family, speaking to friends, then you need to be able to rely on your family and friends to be there when you need them. And if they're not there when you need them, then it can feel very isolating. I understand that. I've been through so many things like that beforehand where I felt that my family weren't as supportive as I'd hoped they'd be. And I mean this about specific members of my family. I'm just trying not to place blame directly because I don't. I feel like it's an overshare of my personal life on this, and you know, if one day like we could speak about that positively when I get to 1 million subscribers or 1 billion views or this, that, the other number, then maybe I'll talk about that more. It's just that no, my personal life isn't really something I'm willing to sell out like that. There is some stuff I'm willing to talk about more publicly. However, I think the idea of a private life is well within the reasonable request anybody can make. Which kind of brings me back to the whole data collection thing with cameras and microphones. So right now I'm using a camera and a microphone to record data to communicate information to you. In the same way, if I didn't have these cameras and microphones, what would I be doing instead? I'd probably be submitting data to an algorithm via, I was going to say passive communication. So it's something I've noticed before, something I call natural flow. And I'm going to have to talk about this specifically in a future podcast, because if anybody is still listening and watching at this point, you've done very well, and my kudos to you. What I call natural flow, I think many people will understand as observing just the kinetic energy of body language. So, for example, if this is person one, this is person one waves and person two responds, and then person two's done this, and person one does this, and then person two does that. Person two, one does this, and person two does that, and then we'll have to do that, and they do that. Sometimes it could be a mirror, sometimes it could be I do this, and then you do that, and eventually you can kind of notice that there's a kinetic energy flow going on. And interestingly, some people try to ebb with that flow, if you're familiar with the phrase ebb and flow, and I've noticed girls specifically doing this as part of, I don't know if it's a flirting thing or if it's some specific people rather than all girls. It's just my first experience of noticing it was with girls. Like, they'll brush their hair behind their ear, or they'll play with their necklace, or they'll do little things to just try and see how much attention you're paying, or to like register their interest with you. And then I noticed more and more it was happening just in dating circles, to put it that way. So it became less, because I started working with people out with the heterosexual bandwidth. I kind of like that's a term, the heterosexual bandwidth. Maybe that'll catch on. Sexuality is a bandwidth. There's a concept. I'm going to write that down. And we'll explain that later. Okay. So once I started spending more time with people, so specifically I noticed homosexual men are way better at understanding that sort of nuanced body language than heterosexual women are. So then it made sense to me, well, if I notice that they're doing that, and then they've got it to such a point that the stuff that the heterosexual women think is subtle. So for instance, I've had it before where they try and like nudge me and make physical contact, and it's like, yeah, all right, love, I can tell what you're doing. It's nowhere near as subtle as you think it is. However, I appreciate the interest. I'll keep note of it. When that stuff is really obvious to somebody, like, I'm not the most attractive man in the world. I'm not the most successful man in the world. There are many far more eligible suitors than me in many categories of eligibility. The point I'm making is that if that stuff is obvious to me, then what I've noticed behaviour between homosexual men, it must be like what fighters refer to as telegraphing, where it's really always like, I'm going to punch you, and it's just like this, and you're just like, I'll just move my head to the side and then it'll miss and it'll be fine. And then stuff that will be less obvious to them will be so difficult for somebody like me to notice, because I haven't bothered to notice that stuff before. So natural flow is something that really interests me, and I want to understand the causes for it, because I think the awareness of it, I think everybody, when I say everybody, I think most people are aware of the term flow and the idea of it, or at least they've heard of it. I don't think everybody understands how deeply flow can affect humans. I think many people are simply not like willfully ignorant, just genuinely unaware of how deeply flow affects people, as well as to the same extent how far you can actually affect other people with flow. So say for instance you got so good at navigating flow that you notice the kinetic energy beyond your local area, you notice it in the entire building regardless of what room you're in, then you'll get to the point where natural flow is, what's the word, boring for want of a better term. So then you'd want to, for me, because I want to understand it at a more advanced level, a more complicated level, I had to start understanding what causes natural flow. And I think a lot of it stems from, what's the word, sexual energy. I think a lot of it is genuinely just people expressing their sexual energy and wanting to communicate interest and how do I phrase this correctly? Because what I understand it is it's almost grooming. And the word grooming I know is loaded in many ways. However, what's weird is it's not exclusive to the idea of predatory grooming, because I've noticed parents doing it with their own kids as a subtle way of reinforcing behaviour patterns. And that's the tricky thing, is because it's one of those things, once you see it, you can't unsee it. You just can't. It's there. You will see it forever. You will never go back to sleep from it, no matter how hard you try. And I notice I'm tapping the table to like reinforce my point with it, because everybody I've spoken to that has noticed it, we can speak about it for hours. Hours and hours and hours. Because it's currently, which is the 7th of May 2023 at 22 minutes past 9 o'clock in the evening, once you notice it, you can't unnotice it, which means if we're noticing it now, with each passing day, there's got to be at least one or two more people that are noticing it. And if, let's say, there's at least one or two people noticing it in every country around the world, that's 263 countries. Let's just say 200 something countries, and that's roughly split the middle between 1 and 2 a day to 300 people a day, which means 300 people a day across a week, that's 2100 people, which means almost 8,500 people a month, which means 85, nearly 100,000 people a year, over 100,000 people a year. Which means if over 100,000 people a year are finding out this stuff at a bare minimum, then slowly but surely, eventually everybody's going to see it and understand it, which means that means natural flow will become one of those things that everybody has to know about, and it won't just be a nuanced understanding of the privileged few, to put it that way. I was going to say the rich. I prefer the term wealthy because there's a difference between rich people and wealthy people. It boils down to like new money, young money versus old money, and that's something I could really talk about for ages with people as well. Is the distinction between what actually is, what money actually is. And understanding natural flow will teach you so much about how money works, because it's not just money. You got to factor for sex, you got to factor for money, you got to factor for violence. Just trust me on that. You really do have to factor for it as a vector, as well as substance. Those seem to be the 4 big things that seem to trigger people. Anyway, I've spoken about a great deal of things today. We're almost at a 2-hour podcast. I've had a terrific time. I hope you guys have enjoyed yourself. Please, 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 please comment, like, share, subscribe, anything else you want to do with it. Add me to a playlist. I don't know, message me to your friends, whatever you want to do. Just, if you enjoyed it, let me know, and I can do more things like this. I'm going to continue making these podcasts anyway because I really enjoy them. If you guys tell me what you guys want me to talk about, I can talk about that stuff more freely. I know these seem like obvious stuff, however, I just feel I wouldn't be doing my due diligence if I didn't say this. Anyway, have a lovely day, have a lovely summer, year, whatever. Just have a nice time.